fields of interest. You can go in and look at, you know, the kind of priorities for funded that are now published on our website. But again, that was then, and this is now. In the past, you may have had to submit proposals for all these different programs. So again, a singular feature of a community foundation, it represents many different sources of funding. And because of the legacy of leadership that we had in Shannon Sadler Hull, she really built an unrestricted endowment that gives us a lot of flexibility to be opportunistic about directing those dollars where we think a lot can be achieved given right time, right leadership, and right ideas. But these are, you know, some of the funds whose names I'm sure you'll recognize that go into that collective pot from which competitive grants are made. And the staff doesn't make decisions about, we staff a process, we do a reviewing and screening, but we have grants management committees that work with us who review and approve all the decisions, and ultimately our board of directors makes the final call on what is ultimately approved of funding. But you should also know they look at that decline list, they really test the staff's assumptions about why things are not, you know, not as strong as perhaps some of the other, or more competitive as some of the other grants received. So these advisory committees are a very important part of the process, and they take their responsibility very deeply. And I should tell you that the staff never goes into these meetings assuming that it's a rubber stamp and a done deal, because I assure you we face tough questions and we have to justify what we move forward with. Sometimes you wonder, where did the process go? It goes on in weeks and weeks, and when are you going to find out? You need the money now. I know this is not encouraging, but this is a kind of a view of the process about how many steps you go through until you ultimately get to a decision. And you don't need to know all the ins and outs about this, except to say that we try and give you a calendar of what by when, so you can have some reasonable expectation about, once your proposal is submitted, about the timeline around when you might expect to hear approval or decline. And generally, if from the time you're asked to submit a proposal until you get a final decision, it's roughly 6 months. And that's because it goes through an extended committee process. Often site visits are part of that. There are grant write-ups, grant meetings of advisory committees before those recommendations go to a full board. Now, for many of the organizations who may be on the more modest end of the grant spectrum, we also run a grants program, a small grants program, and we've upped that to $175,000 a year. It's a $10,000 maximum grant, and we give them for organizational and program development grants. And we try to make that money stretch. So we ask you to be very strategic about thinking, ask us for what you need and what you would, you know, instead of just automatically submitting something for 10 grand. Because we're trying to make sure we get this money out in many ways. These small grants have been very powerful tools because it's often flexible money and money to support things you might not otherwise be able to do. These are the two areas of priority. And again, all these criteria and guidelines, so let me just blitz through this quickly because I want to get down to where the conversation, and you know also, and Liz has already referenced, we do workshops, you know, things like today that we hope will be helpful for those of you who are trying to do development work. We have a grantsmanship training session coming up in May where it's a week-long intensive course in grant and proposal writing. And we also have a funding resource center and an online database. And Pat Rowan, Jillian Vukasic, and Daryl Houston, would y'all please, some of y'all met them coming in the door. Come on out here so they can see you. Thank you. This is our program department. I still have a hand directly involved. As you know, I came on as a vice president for programs. I did that for work for a year. And the position that I left that is now vacant won't be filled in the short term. And for that reason, I expect to still be involved in providing the leadership around the program work. Jillian is our senior program officer, is managing the day-to-day operations. And Daryl is kind of a go-to person for general information and queries about what we're doing. All right, this is now. The board and our committees at the moment are assessing how best to ensure sustained efforts of priority to support. We have also been affected by these economic downturns. We do have an investment program. We have a strong history of stewardship and oversight provided by our board, but as the market fares, so do we. And so in the short term, we are looking at longer term about what grant making is going to look like in the future. Some of the things that we're thinking about is clear priorities, looking more closely at operational support and perhaps more flexibility in the use of the dollars that we do offer, providing grant incentives for collaborations and cooperative enterprises of nonprofits working together, new opportunities being tried throughout the field, shared back offices, consolidations of efforts, cash reserve loan pools are some of the ideas that foundations all across the country are struggling with, really looking through the lens of capacity building anew to figure out in this climate what can we do better and differently that's going to help the nonprofit sector. I think it's important to communicate that reliance on more grant seeking is going to be insufficient to address the needs that you see in your communities. I mean, it's always been the burden of leadership for nonprofits to go out and raise money. That's never gone away. But I think grant seeking alone is not going to solve the challenges that we all face any more than grant making is going to do it, because we are also facing a diminished bottom line of what's available. So less is more, fewer grants, greater focus is a current conversation within our board and committees. Leadership with change is the focus. Again, going back to the notion that in this environment, public policy and advocacy are probably going to become more critical to addressing the needs of your constituency and working to better, together and to do differently. So we are working to sustain the present level of giving, so we're looking at how to stretch the dollars we've budgeted this year into future years so we can sustain that. Total giving is likely and expected to decrease, so we are looking at opportunities for leveraging, collaborating, working with other funders. We are also about really appealing to donors, growing new sources of giving, and asking donors to dig deeper. And we know we have many small gifts can often be very powerful in helping to invite people to the table, because everyone does have something to contribute, and a greater focus on safety net giving while increasing focus on policy and advocacy. So these are all things that are now flavor as we look forward into the grant-making cycle for the future for unrestricted and competitive grant-making, which will actually next year begin. It'll be fall before we open up another grant-making cycle. We do still have small grants funding available this year, so if you have something that you think might be a fit for fund, I invite you to explore the criteria and guidelines for that funding and have a conversation with one of our program officers. Thank you.